Chapter 12 of Donal Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devorah Allen. Donal Grant by George MacDonald. Chapter 12 The Castle. The next morning came a cart from the castle to fetch his box, and after breakfast he set out for his new abode. He took the path by the riverside. The morning was glorious. The sun and the river and the birds were jubilant, and the wind gave life to everything. It rippled the stream and fluttered the long webs bleaching in the sun. They rose and fell like white waves on the bright green lake, and women, homely nereids of the grassy sea, were besprinkling them with spray. There were dull sounds of wooden machinery near, but they made no discord with the sweetness of the hour, speaking only of activity, not labour. From the long bleaching meadows by the riverside rose the wooded base of the castle. Donal's bosom swelled with delight. Then came a sting. Was he already forgetting his inextinguishable grief? But, he answered himself, God is more to me than any woman. When he puts joy in my heart, shall I not be glad? When he calls my name, shall I not answer? He stepped out joyfully, and was soon climbing the hill. He was again admitted by the old butler. "I will show you at once," he said, "how to go and come at your own will." He led him through doors and along passages to a postern opening on a little walled garden at the east end of the castle. "This door," he said, "is, you observe, at the foot of Baliol's tower, and in that tower is your room. I will show it you." He led the way up a spiral stair that might almost have gone inside the newel of the great staircase. Up and up they went, until Donal began to wonder, and still they went up. "You're young, sir," said the butler, "and sound of wind and limb, so you'll soon think nothing of it." "I never was up so high before, except on a hillside," returned Donal. "The college tower is nothing to this." "In a day or two you'll be shooting up and down it like a bird. I used to do so myself. I got into the way of keeping a shoulder foremost, and screwing up as if I was a blob of air. Old age does make fools of us." "You don't like it, then?" "No, I do not. Who does?" "It's only that you get spent as you go up. The fresh air at the top of the stair will soon revive you," said Donal. But his conductor did not understand him. "That's all very well, so long as you're young, but when it has got you, you'll pant and grumble like the rest of us." In the distance, Donal saw age coming slowly after him, to claw him in his clutch, as the old song says. "Please God," he thought, "by the time he comes up, I'll be ready to try a fall with him. O thou eternally young, the years have no hold on thee. Let them have none on thy child. I too shall have life eternal." Ere they reached the top of the stair, the man halted and opened a door. Donal entering saw a small room, nearly round, a portion of the circle taken off by the stair. On the opposite side was a window projecting from the wall, whence he could look in 3 different directions. The wide country lay at his feet. He saw the winding road by which he had ascended, the gate by which he had entered, the meadow with its white stripes through which he had come, and the river flowing down. He followed it with his eyes. Lo, there was the sea, shining in the sun like a diamond shield. It was but the little German Ocean, yet one with the great world ocean. He turned to his conductor. "Yes," said the old man, answering his look, "it's a glorious sight. When first I looked out there, I thought I was in eternity." The walls were bare even of plaster. He could have counted the stones in them, but they were dry as a bone. "You are wondering," said the old man, "how you are to keep warm in the winter. Look here, you shut this door over the window. See how thick and strong it is. There is your fireplace, and for fuel there's plenty below. It is a labour to carry it up, I grant, but if I was you I would set to o' nights when nobody was about, and carry till I had a stock laid in." "But," said Donal, "I should fill up my room. I like to be able to move about a little." "Ah," replied the old man, "you don't know what a space you have up here all to yourself. Come this way." 2 turns more up the stair, and they came to another door. It opened into wide space. From it Donal stepped on a ledge or bartizan, without any parapet, that ran round the tower, passing above the window of his room. It was well he had a steady brain, for he found the height affect him more than that of a precipice on Glashgar. Doubtless he would get used to it, for the old man had stepped out without the smallest hesitation. Round the tower he followed him. On the other side, a few steps rose to a watch-tower, a sort of ornate sentry-box in stone, where one might sit and regard with wide vision the whole country. Avoiding this, another step or two led them to the roof of the castle, of great stone slabs. A broad passage ran between the rise of the roof and a battlemented parapet. By this time they came to a flat roof, onto which they descended by a few steps. Here stood 2 rough sheds, with nothing in them. "There's stowage," said the old man. "Yes, indeed," answered Donal, to whom the idea of his aerie was growing more and more agreeable. "But would there be no objection to my using the place for such a purpose?" "What objection?" returned his guide. "I doubt if a single person but myself knows it." "And shall I be allowed to carry up as much as I please?" "I allow you," said the butler with importance. "Of course you will not waste. I am dead against waste. But as to what is needful, use your freedom. Dinner will be ready for you in the schoolroom at 7. At the door of his room the old man left him, and after listening for a moment to his descending steps, Donal re-entered his chamber. Why they put him so apart, Donal never asked himself. That he should have such command of his leisure as this isolation promised him was a consequence very satisfactory. He proceeded at once to settle himself in his new quarters. Finding some shelves in a recess of the wall, he arranged his books upon them, and laid his few clothes in the chest of drawers beneath. He then got out his writing material, and sat down. Though his window was so high, the warm pure air came in full of the aromatic odours rising in the hot sunshine from the young pine trees far below, and from a lark far above descended news of Heaven Gate. The scent came up, and the song came down all the time he was writing to his mother, a long letter. When he had closed and addressed it, he fell into a reverie. Apparently he was to have his meals by himself. He was glad of it. He would be able to read all the time. But how was he to find the schoolroom? Some one would surely fetch him. They would remember he did not know his way about the place. It wanted yet an hour to dinner time, when, finding himself drowsy, he threw himself on his bed, where presently he fell fast asleep. The night descended, and when he came to himself, its silences were deep around him. It was not dark, there was no moon, but the twilight was clear. He could read the face of his watch. It was 12 o'clock. No one had missed him. He was very hungry. But he had been hungrier before, and survived it. In his wallet were still some remnants of oatcake. He took it in his hand, and stepping out on the bartizan, crept with careful steps round to the watch-tower. There he seated himself in the stone chair, and ate his dry morsels in the starry presences. Sleep had refreshed him, and he was wide awake, yet there was on him the sense of a strange existence. Never before had he so known himself. Often had he passed the night in the open air, but never before had his night consciousness been such. Never had he felt the same way alone. He was parted from the whole earth, like the ship-boy on the giddy mast. Nothing was below but a dimness. The earth and all that was in it was massed into a vague shadow. It was as if he had died, and gone where existence was independent of solidity and sense. Above him was domed the vast of the starry heavens. He could neither flee from it, nor ascend to it. For a moment he felt it the symbol of life, yet an unattainable, hopeless thing. He hung suspended between heaven and earth, an outcast of both, a denizen of neither. The true life seemed ever to retreat, never to await his grasp. Nothing but the beholding of the face of the Son of Man could set him at rest as to its reality. Nothing less than the assurance from his own mouth could satisfy him that all was true, all well. Life was a thing so essentially divine that he could not know it in itself till his own essence was pure. But alas, how dreamlike was the old story! Was God indeed to be reached by the prayers, affected by the needs of men? How was he to feel sure of it? Once more, as often heretofore, he found himself crying into the great world to know whether there was an ear to hear. What if there should come to him no answer? How frightful then would be his loneliness! But to seem not to be heard might be part of the discipline of his darkness. It might be for the perfecting of his faith that he must not yet know how near God was to him. "Lord," he cried, "eternal life is to know thee and thy Father. I do not know thee and thy Father. I have not eternal life. I have but life enough to hunger for more. Show me plainly of the Father whom thou alone knowest." And as he prayed, something like a touch of God seemed to begin and grow in him till it was more than his heart could hold, and the universe about him was not large enough to hold in its hollow the heart that swelled with it. "God is enough," he said, and sat in peace. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Donal Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devorah Allen. Donal Grant by George MacDonald. Chapter 13. A Sound. All at once came to his ear through the night a strange something. Whence or what it was he could not even conjecture. Was it a moan of the river from below? Was it a lost music tone that had wandered from afar and grown faint? Was it one of those mysterious sounds he had read of as born in the air itself, and not yet explained of science? Was it the fluttered skirt of some angelic song of lamentation? For if the angels rejoice, they surely must lament. Or was it a stilled human moaning? Was any wrong being done far down in the white gleaming meadows below, by the banks of the river whose platinum glimmer he could descry through the molten amethystine darkness of the starry night? Presently came a long-drawn musical moan. It must be the sound of some muffled instrument. Verily night was the time for strange things. Could sounds be begotten in the fir-trees by the rays of the hot sun, and born in the stillness of the following dark, as the light which the diamond receives in the day glows out in the gloom? There are parents and their progeny that never exist together. Again the sound, hardly to be called sound. It resembled a vibration of organ pipe too slow and deep to affect the hearing, only this seemed rather too high, as if only his soul heard it. He would steal softly down the dumb stone stair. Some creature might be in trouble and needing help. He crept back along the bartizan. The stair was dark as the very heart of the night. He groped his way down. The spiral stair is the safest of all. You cannot tumble far ere brought up by the enclosing cylinder. Arrived at the bottom, and feeling about, he could not find the door to the outer air which the butler had shown him. It was wall wherever his hands fell. He could not find again the stair he had left. He could not tell in what direction it lay. He had got into a long windowless passage connecting two wings of the house, and in this he was feeling his way, fearful of falling down some stair or trap. He came at last to a door, low-browed like almost all in the house. Opening it, was it a thinner darkness or the faintest gleam of light he saw? And was that again the sound he had followed, fainter and farther off than before, a downy wind-wafted plume from the skirt of some stray harmony? At such a time of the night, surely it was strange. It must come from one who could not sleep, and was solacing himself with sweet sounds, breathing a soul into the uncompanionable silence. If so it was, he had no right to search farther. But how was he to return? He dared hardly move, lest he should be found wandering over the house in the dead of night like a thief, or one searching after its secrets. He must sit down and wait for the morning. Its earliest light would perhaps enable him to find his way to his quarters. Feeling about him a little, his foot struck against the step of a stair. Examining it with his hands, he believed it the same he had ascended in the morning. Even in a great castle, could there be two such royal stairs? He sat down upon it, and leaning his head on his hands, composed himself to a patient waiting for the light. Waiting pure is perhaps the hardest thing for flesh and blood to do well. The relations of time to mind are very strange. Some of their phenomena seem to prove that time is only of the mind, belonging to the intellect as good and evil belong to the spirit. Anyhow, if it were not for the clocks of the universe, one man would live a year, a century, where another would live but a day. But the mere motion of time, not to say the consciousness of empty time, is fearful. It is this empty time that the fool is always trying to kill. His effort should be to fill it. yet nothing but the living God can fill it, though it be but the shape our existence takes to us. Only where he is, emptiness is not. Eternity will be but an intense present to the child with whom is the Father. Such thoughts alighted, flitted, and passed for the first few moments through the mind of Donal, as he sat half-consciously waiting for the dawn. It was thousands of miles away, over the great round of the sunward-turning earth. His imagination woke, and began to picture the great hunt of the shadows, fleeing before the arrows of the sun, over the broad face of the mighty world, its mountains, seas, and plains in turn confessing the light, and submitting to him who slays for them the haunting demons of their dark. Then again the moments were the small cogs on the wheels of time, whereby the dark castle in which he sat was rushing ever towards the light. The cogs were caught, and the wheels turned swiftly, and the time and the darkness sped. He forgot the labour of waiting. If now and then he fancied a tone through the darkness, it was to his mind the music march of the morning to his rescue from the dungeon of the night. But that was no musical tone which made the darkness shudder around him. He sprang to his feet. It was a human groan, a groan as of one in dire pain, the pain of a soul's agony. It seemed to have descended the stair to him. The next instant Donal was feeling his way up, cautiously, as if on each succeeding step he might come against the man who had groaned. Tales of haunted houses rushed into his memory. What if he were but pursuing the groan of an actor in the past, a creature the slave of his own conscious memory, a mere haunter of the present which he could not influence, one without physical relation to the embodied, save in the groans he could yet utter? But it was more in awe than in fear that he went. Up and up he felt his way, all about him as still as darkness and the night could make it. A ghostly cold crept through his skin. It was drawn together as by a gently freezing process, and there was a pulling at the muscles of his chest, as if his mouth were being dragged open by a martingale. As he felt his way along the wall, sweeping its great endless circle round and round in spiral ascent, all at once his hand seemed to go through it. He started and stopped. It was the door of the room into which he had been shown to meet the earl. It stood wide open. A faint glimmer came through the window from the star-filled sky. He stepped just within the doorway. Was not that another glimmer on the floor, from the back of the room, through a door he did not remember having seen yesterday? There again was the groan, and nigh at hand. Someone must be in sore need. He approached the door, and looked through. A lamp, nearly spent, hung from the ceiling of a small room which might be an office or study, or a place where papers were kept. It had the look of an antechamber, but that it could not be, for there was but the one door. In the dim light he descried a vague form leaning up against one of the walls, as if listening to something through it. As he gazed, it grew plainer to him, and he saw a face, its eyes staring wide, which yet seemed not to see him. It was the face of the earl. Donal felt as if in the presence of the disembodied. He stood fascinated, nor made attempt to retire or conceal himself. The figure turned its face to the wall, put the palms of its hands against it, and moved them up and down, and this way and that, then looked at them, and began to rub them against each other. Donal came to himself. He concluded it was a case of sleep-walking. He had read that it was dangerous to wake the sleeper, but that he seldom came to mischief when left alone, and was about to slip away as he had come, when the faint sound of a far-off chord crept through the silence. The earl again laid his ear to the wall, but there was only silence. He went through the same dumb show as before, then turned as if to leave the place. Donal turned also, and hurriedly felt his way to the stair. Then first he was in danger of terror, for in stealing through the darkness from one who could find his way without his eyes, he seemed pursued by a creature not of this world. On the stair he went down a step or two, then lingered, and heard the earl come on it also. He crept close to the newel, leaving the great width of the stair free, but the steps of the earl went upward. Donal descended, sat down again at the bottom of the stair, and began again to wait. No sound came to him through the rest of the night. The slow hours rolled away, and the slow light drew nearer. Now and then he was on the point of falling into a doze, but would suddenly start wide awake, listening through a silence that seemed to fill the whole universe and deepen around the castle. At length he was aware that the darkness had, unobserved of him, grown weaker, that the approach of the light was sickening it. The day-spring was about to take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of its lap. He sought the long passage by which he had come, and felt his way to the other end. It would be safer to wait there if he could get no farther. But somehow he came to the foot of his own stair, and sped up as if it were the ladder of heaven. He threw himself on his bed, fell fast asleep, and did not wake till the sun was high. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Donal Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devorah Allen. Donal Grant, by George MacDonald. Chapter 14. The Schoolroom. Old Simmons, the butler, woke him. "I was afraid something was the matter, sir. They tell me you did not come down last night, and breakfast has been waiting you 2 hours." "I should not have known where to find it," said Donal. "The knowledge of an old castle is not intuitive." "How long will you take to dress?" asked Simmons. 10 minutes, if there is any hurry," answered Donal. "I will come again in 20. Or, if you are willing to save an old man's bones, I will be at the bottom of the stair at that time to take charge of you. I would have looked after you yesterday, but his lordship was poorly, and I had to be in attendance on him till after midnight." Donal thought it impossible he should of himself have found his way to the schoolroom. With all he could do to remember the turnings, he found the endeavour hopeless, and gave it up with a not unpleasing despair. Through strange passages, through doors in all directions, upstairs and down they went, and at last came to a long low room, barely furnished, with a pleasant outlook, and immediate access to the open air. The windows were upon a small grassy court, with a sun-dial in the centre. A door opened on a paved court. At one end of the room a table was laid with 10 times as many things as he could desire to eat, though he came to it with a good appetite. The butler himself waited upon him. He was a good-natured old fellow, with a nose somewhat too red for the ordinary wear of one in his responsible position. "I hope the earl is better this morning," said Donal. "Well, I can't say. He's but a delicate man is the earl, and has been so long as I have known him. He was with the army in India, and the sun, they say, give him a stroke, and ever since he have headaches that bad. But in between he seems pretty well, and nothing displeases him more than ask after his health, or how he slept the night. But he's a good master, and I hope to end my days with him. I'm not one as likes new faces and new places. One good place is enough for me, says I, so long as it is a good one. Take some of this game pie, sir." Donal made haste with his breakfast, and to Simmons' astonishment had ended when he thought him just well begun. "How shall I find Master Davy?" he asked. "He is wild to see you, sir. When I've cleared away, just have the goodness to ring this bell out of that window, and he'll be with you as fast as he can lay his feet to the ground." Donal rang the handbell. A shout mingled with the clang of it. Then came the running of swift feet over the stones of the court, and Davy burst into the room. "Oh, sir," he cried, "I am glad! It is good of you to come." "Well, you see, Davy," returned Donal, "everybody has got to do something to carry the world on a bit. My work is to help make a man of you, only I can't do much except you help me. And if I find I am not making a good job of you, I shan't stop many hours after the discovery. If you want to keep me, you must mind what I say, and so help me to make a man of you." "It will be long before I am a man," said Davy rather disconsolately. "It depends on yourself. The boy that is longest in becoming a man is the boy that thinks himself a man before he is a bit like one." "Come then, let us do something," said Davy. "Come away," rejoined Donal. "What shall we do first?" "I don't know. You must tell me, sir." "What would you like best to do? I mean, if you might do what you pleased." Davy thought a little, then said, "I should like to write a book." "What kind of a book?" "A beautiful story." "Isn't it just as well to read such a book? Why should you want to write one?" "Because then I should have it go just as I wanted it. I am almost always, disappointed with the thing that comes next. But if I wrote it myself, Then I shouldn't get tired of it. It would be what pleased me, and not what pleased somebody else." "Well," said Donal, after thinking for a moment, "suppose you begin to write a book." "Oh, that will be fun! Much better than learning verbs and nouns." "But the verbs and nouns are just the things that go to make a story, with not a few adjectives and adverbs, and a host of conjunctions, and, if it be a very moving story, a good many interjections. These all you have got to put together with good choice, or the story will not be one you would care to read. Perhaps you had better not begin till I see whether you know enough about those verbs and nouns to do the thing decently. Show me your school books." "There they all are, on that shelf. I haven't opened one of them since Percy came home. He laughed at them all, and so Archie, that's Lady Arctura, told him he might teach me himself, and he wouldn't, and she wouldn't, with him to laugh at her, and I've had such a jolly time ever since, reading books out of the library. Have you seen the library, Mr. Grant?" "No, I've seen nothing yet. Suppose we begin with a holiday, and you begin by teaching me." "Teaching you, sir? I'm not able to teach you." "Why, didn't you as much as offer to teach me the library? Can't you teach me this great old castle? And aren't you going to teach yourself to me?" "That would be a funny lesson, sir." "The least funny, the most serious lesson you could teach me. You are a book God has begun, and he has sent me to help him go on with it. So I must learn what he has written already before I try to do anything." "But you know what a boy is, sir. Why should you want to learn me?" "You might as well say that because I have read one or two books I must know every book. To understand one boy helps to understand another, but every boy is a new boy, different from every other boy, and every one has to be understood." "Yes, for sometimes Archie won't hear me out, and I feel so cross with her I should like to give her a good box on the ear. What king was it, sir, that made the law that no lady, however disagreeable, was to have her ears boxed? Do you think it a good law, sir?" "It is good for you and me, anyhow." "And when Percy says, 'Oh, go away, don't bother,' I feel as if I could hit him hard. Yet if I happen to hurt him I am so sorry. And why then should I want to hurt him?" "There's something in this little fellow," said Donal to himself. "Ah, why indeed?" he answered. "You see you don't understand yourself yet." "No, indeed." "Then how could you think I should understand you all at once? And a boy must be understood, else what's to become of him? Fancy a poor boy living all day, and sleeping all night, and nobody understanding him." "That would be dreadful. But you will understand me?" "Only a little. I'm not wise enough to understand any boy." But isn't that what you said you came for? I thought—" "Yes," answered Donal, "that is what I came for. But if I fancied I quite understood any boy, that would be a sure sign I did not understand him. There is one who understands every boy, as well as if there were no other boy in the whole world." "Then why doesn't every boy go to him when he can't get fair play?" "Ah, why? That is just what I want you to do. He can do better than give you fair play even. He can make you give other people fair play, and delight in it." "Tell me where he is." "That is what I have to teach you. Mere telling is not much use. Telling is what makes people think they know when they do not, and makes them foolish." "What is his name?" "I will not tell you that just yet, for then you would think you knew him, when you knew next to nothing about him. Look here, look at this book," he went on, pulling a copy of Boethius from his pocket. "Look at the name on the back of it. It is the name of the man that wrote the book." Davy spelled it out. "Now you know all about the book, don't you?" "No, sir, I don't know anything about it." "Well then, my father's name is Robert Grant. You know now what a good man he is." "No, I don't. I should like to see him, though." "You would love him if you did. But you see now that knowing the name of a person does not make you know the person." "But you said, sir, that if you told me the name of that person I should fancy I knew all about him. I don't fancy I know all about your father now you have told me his name." "You have me there," answered Donal. "I did not say quite what I ought to have said. I should have said that when we know a little about a person, and are used to hearing his name, then we are ready to think we know all about him. I heard a man the other day, a man who had never spoken to your father, talk as if he knew all about him." "I think I understand," said Davy. To confess ignorance is to lose respect with the ignorant who would appear to know. But there is a worse thing than to lose the respect even of the wise, to deserve to lose it. and that he does who would gain a respect that does not belong to him. But a confession of ignorance is a ground of respect with a well-bred child, and even with many ordinary boys will raise a man's influence. They recognize his loyalty to the truth. Act truth is infinitely more than fact truth. The love of the truth infinitely beyond the knowledge of it. They went out together, and when they had gone the round of the place outside, Davy would have taken him over the house, but Donal said they would leave something for another time, and made him lie down for 10 minutes. This the boy thought a great hardship, but Donal saw that he needed to be taught to rest. 10 times in those 10 minutes he was on the point of jumping up, but Donal found a word sufficient to restrain him. When the 10 minutes were over, he set him an addition sum. The boy protested he knew all the rules of arithmetic. "But," said Donal, "I must know that you know them. That is my business. Do this one, however easy it is." The boy obeyed, and brought him the sum, incorrect. "Now, Davy," said Donal, "you said you knew all about addition, but you have not done this sum correctly." "I have only made a blunder, sir." "But a rule is no rule if it is not carried out. Everything goes on the supposition of its being itself, and not something else. People that talk about good things without doing them are left out. You are not master of addition until your addition is to be depended upon." The boy found it hard to fix his attention. To fix it on something he did not yet understand would be too hard. He must learn to do so in the pursuit of accuracy where he already understood. Then he would not have to fight 2 difficulties at once, that of understanding and that of fixing his attention. But for a long time he never kept him more than 1/4 of an hour at work on the same thing. When he had done the sum correctly, and a second without need of correction, he told him to lay his slate aside, and he would tell him a fairy story. Therein he succeeded tolerably, in the opinion of Davy wonderfully. What a tutor this was, who let fairies into the schoolroom! The tale was of no very original construction, the youngest brother gaining in the path of righteousness what the elder brothers lose through masterful selfishness. A man must do a thing because it is right, even if he die for it. But truth were poor indeed if it did not bring at last all things subject to it. As beauty and truth are one, so are truth and strength one. Must God be ever on the cross that we poor worshippers may pay him our highest honour? Is it not enough to know that if the devil were the greater, yet would not God do him homage, but would hang for ever on his cross? Truth is joy and victory. The true hero is adjudged to bliss, nor can in the nature of things, that is, of God, escape it. He who holds by life and resists death must be victorious. His very life is a slaying of death. A man may die for his opinion, and may only be living to himself. A man who dies for the truth dies to himself and to all that is not true. "What a beautiful story!" cried Davy when it ceased. "Where did you get it, Mr. Grant?" "Where all stories come from." "Where is that?" "The Think Book." "What a funny name! I never heard it. Will it be in the library?" "No, it is in no library. It is the book God is always writing at one end and blotting out at the other. It is made of thoughts, not words. It is the Think Book." "Now I understand. You got the story out of your own head." "Yes, perhaps. But how did it get into my head?" "I can't tell that. Nobody can tell that." "Nobody can that never goes up above his own head, that never shuts the Think Book and stands upon it. When one does, then the Think Book swells to a great mountain, and lifts him up above all the world. Then he sees where the stories come from, and how they get into his head. Are you to have a ride to-day?" "I ride or not, just as I like." "Well, we will now do just as we both like, I hope, and it will be 2 likes instead of 1. That is, if we are true friends." "We shall be true friends, that we shall." "How can that be, between a little boy like you and a grown man like me?" "By me being good." "By both of us being good. No other way. If one of us only was good, we could never be true friends. I must be good as well as you, else we shall never understand each other." "How kind you are, Mr. Grant! You treat me just like another one," said Davy. "But we must not forget that I am the big one and you the little one, and that we can't be the other one to each other, except the little one does what the big one tells him. That's the way to fit into each other." "Oh, of course," answered Davy, as if there could not be two minds about that. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Donal Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devorah Allen. Donal Grant by George MacDonald. Chapter 15. Horse and Man. During the first day, and the next, Donal did not even come in sight of any other of the family. But on the third day, after their short early school, for he seldom let Davy work till he was tired, and never after, going with him through the stable yard, they came upon Lord Forgue as he mounted his horse, a nervous, fiery, thin-skinned thoroughbred. The moment his master was on him, he began to back and rear. Forgue gave him a cut with his whip. He went wild, plunging and dancing and kicking. The young lord was a horseman in the sense of having a good seat, but he knew little about horses. They were to him creatures to be compelled, not friends with whom to hold sweet concert. He had not learned that to rule ill is worse than to obey ill. Kings may be worse than it is in the power of any subject to be. As he was raising his arm for a second useless, cruel, and dangerous blow, Donal darted to the horse's head. "You mustn't do that, my lord," he said. "You'll drive him mad." But the worst part of Forgue's nature was uppermost. In his rage all the vices of his family rushed to the top. He looked down on Donal with a fury checked only by contempt. "Keep off," he said, "or it will be the worse for you. What do you know about horses?" "Enough to know that you are not fair to him. I will not let you strike the poor animal. Just look at this water chain." "Hold your tongue, and stand away, or by—" "You will not fright me, sir," said Donal, whose English would, for years, upon any excitement, turn cowardly and run away, leaving his mother tongue to bear the brunt. "I'm no timorsome." Forgue brought down his whip with a great stinging blow upon Donal's shoulder and back. The fierce blood of the Highland Celt rushed to his brain, and had not the man in him held by God and trampled on the devil, there might then have been miserable work. But though he clenched his teeth, he fettered his hands and ruled his tongue, and the master of men was master still. "My lord," he said, after one instant's thunderous silence, "there's that in me would think as little o' throttling ye as ye do o' ill using your poor beast. But I'm not going to drop his quarrel, and take up my own. That would be cowardly." Here he patted the creature's neck, and recovering his composure and his English, went on. "I tell you, my lord, the curb chain is too tight. The animal is suffering as you can have no conception of, or you would pity him." "Let him go," cried Forgue, "or I will make you." He raised his whip again, the more enraged that the groom stood looking on with his mouth open. "I tell your lordship," said Donal, "it is my turn to strike, and if you hit the animal again before that chain is slackened, I will pitch you out of the saddle." For answer Forgue struck the horse over the head. The same moment he was on the ground. Donal had taken him by the leg and thrown him off. He was not horseman enough to keep hold of the reins, and Donal led the horse a little way off, and left him to get up in safety. The poor animal was pouring with sweat, shivering and trembling, yet throwing his head back every moment. Donal could scarcely undo the chain. It was twisted. His lordship had fastened it himself, and sharp edges pressed his jaw at the least touch of the rein. He had not yet rehooked it, when Forgue was upon him with a second blow of his whip. The horse was scared afresh at the sound, and it was all he could do to hold him, but he succeeded at length in calming him. When he looked about him, Forgue was gone. He led the horse into the stable, put him in his stall, and proceeded to unsaddle him. Then first he was re-aware of the presence of Davy. The boy was stamping, with fierce eyes and white face, choking with silent rage. "Davy, my child," said Donal, and Davy recovered his power of speech. "I'll go and tell my father," he said, and made for the stable door. "Which of us are you going to tell upon?" asked Donal with a smile. "Percy, of course!" he replied, almost with a scream. "You are a good man, Mr. Grant, and he is a bad fellow. My father will give it him well. He doesn't often, but oh, can't he just! To dare to strike you! I'll go to him at once, whether he's in bed or not." "No, you won't, my boy. Listen to me. Some people think it's a disgrace to be struck. I think it a disgrace to strike. I have a right over your brother by that blow, and I mean to keep it, for his good. You didn't think I was afraid of him? No, no, anybody could see you weren't a bit afraid of him. I would have struck him again if he had killed me for it." "I don't doubt you would, but when you understand, you will not be so ready to strike. I could have killed your brother more easily than held his horse. You don't know how strong I am, or what a blow of my fist would be to a delicate fellow like that. I hope his fall has not hurt him." "I hope it has. A little, I mean. Only a little," said the boy, looking in the face of his tutor. "But tell me why you did not strike him. It would be good for him to be well beaten." "It will, I hope, be better for him to be well forgiven. He will be ashamed of himself the sooner, I think. But why I did not strike him was, that I am not my own master." "But my father, I am sure, would not have been angry with you. He would have said you had a right to do it." "Perhaps, but the earl is not the master I mean." "Who is then?" "Jesus Christ." Oh. He says I must not return evil for evil, a blow for a blow. I don't mind what people say about it. He would not have me disgrace myself. He never even threatened those that struck him." "But he wasn't a man, you know." "Not a man? What was he then?" "He was God, you know." "And isn't God a man, and ever so much more than a man?" The boy made no answer, and Donal went on. "Do you think God would have his child do anything disgraceful?" "Why, Davy, you don't know your own father. What God wants of us is to be downright honest, and do what he tells us without fear." Davy was silent. His conscience reproved him, as the conscience of a true-hearted boy will reprove him at the very mention of the name of God, until he sets himself consciously to do his will. Donal said no more, and they went for their walk. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Donal Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devorah Allen. Donal Grant, by George MacDonald. Chapter 16. Colloquies. In the evening Donal went to see Andrew Comyn. "Well, how are you getting on with the earl?" asked the cobbler. "You set me a good example of saying nothing about him," answered Donal, "and I will follow it, at least till I know more. I have scarce seen him yet." "That's right," returned the cobbler with satisfaction. "I'm thinking ye'll be one of the few 'at can rule their own hoose, that is, hold their own tongues till the hour for speech be come. Stick ye to that, my dear sir, and more'll be weel nor in general as weel." "I'm come to ye for a bit o' help, though. I want light upon a question 'at's long troubled me. What think ye? How far does the command laid upon us, as to warfare 'tween man and man, reach? Are we never to raise the hand to human bein', think ye?" "Well, I have thought a heap about it, and I daur not say 'at I'm just absolute clear upon the matter. But there may be part clear where all's not clear, and by what we understand we come the nearer to what we do not understand. There's one thing unco plain, 'at we're on no account to return evil for evil. Anybody 'at calls himsel' a Christian maun understand that muckle. We're to give no place to revenge, inside or out. Therefore we're no to give blow for blow. Gien a man hit ye, ye're to take it in God's name. But whether things mayna come to a point whereat ye're boun', still in God's name, to defend the life God has gi'en ye, I canna say. I haena the light to justify me in denyin' it. There maun surely, I hae said to mysel', be a time when a man may hae to do what God does so often, make use of the strong hand. But it's clear he maunna do it in rage. That's ower near hate, and hate's the devil's awn. A man may, gien he live verra near the Lord, be whiles angry unsinned. But the wrath o' man worketh not the righteousness o' God, and the wrath that rises in the midst o' encounter is no like to be o' the nature o' divine wrath. To win at it, gien it be possible, lat's consider the Lord, how he did. There's no word o' him ever liftin' hand to protec' himsel'. The only thing like it was for others. To gar them let his disciples alone, maybe till they were like enough till himsel' no to run, he put out mair nor his hand upon them that came to take him. He struck them sair with the power itself that moves a' arms. But not verra sair, neither. He but knockit them doon, just to let them ken they were to do as he bade them, and let his folk be. And maybe to let them ken 'at gien he let them take him, it was no 'at he couldna hinder them gien he liked.
I canna help thinking we may stand up for ither folk. An' I'm no sayin' 'at we arena to defend ourselves frae a set attack wi' design, but there's something o' mair importance yet nor kennin' the richt of any question." "What can that be? What can be o' mair importance nor doin' richt in the sicht o' God?" said Donal. "Bein' richt wi' the verra thoucht o' God, so 'at we canna mistake, but maun ken just what he wad hae done. That's the big richt, the mother o' a' the love o' the richts. That's to be as the Maister was. Ony gait, whatever we do, it maun be sic as to be done, an' it maun be done in the name o' God. Whan we do naething, we maun do that naething in the name o' God. A body may weel say, 'O Lord, thou has not letten me see what I oucht to do, so I'll do naething.' Gien a man oucht to defend himsel', but disna do it, 'cause he thinks God wadna hae him do it, will God leave him undefent for that? Or gien a body stands up in the name o' God, an' fronts an army o' enemies, div ye think God 'll forsake him 'cause he's made a mistake? Whatever's done wantin' faith maun be sin, it canna help it. Whatever's done in faith canna be sin, though it may be a mistake. Only let not a man take presumption for faith. That's a fearsome mistake, for it's just the opposite." "I thank ye," said Donal. "I'll consider wi' my best endeavour what ye hae said. But of all things," resumed the cobbler, "look 'at ye love fair play. Fair play's a won'erfu' word, a gran' thing constantly lost sicht o'. Man, I hae been tryin' to win at the doin' o' the richt this mony a year, but I daurna yet lat mysel' act upo' the spur o' the moment whaur my ain interest's concerned. My ain side micht yet blind me to the other man's side o' the business. Onybody can un'erstan' his ain richt, but it takes trible an' thoucht to un'erstan' what another counts his richt. Twa richts canna weel clash. It's a wrang an' a richt, or part wrang an' a part richt 'at clashes." "Gien a'body did that, I doubt there would be few fortunes made," said Donal. "Aboot that I canna say, no kennin'. I daurna discover a law where I hae not knowledge. But this same fair play lies, alang wi' love, at the verra root an' foundation o' the universe. The theologians had a glimmer o' the fac' when they made sae muckle o' justice, only their justice is sic a miserable sma' bit plaister image o' justice 'at it maist gars an honest body lauch. They seem to me like shepherds 'at rave down the door posts, an' syne block up the door wi' them." Donal told him of the quarrel he had had with lord Forgue, and asked him whether he thought he had done right. "Weel," answered the cobbler, "I'm as far frae blamin' you as I am frae justifeein' the yoong lord." "He seems to me a fine kin' o' a lad," said Donal, "though some owerbearin'." "The likes o' him are mair to be excused for that nor ither folk, for they hae great disadvantages in the position an' the upbringin'. It's no easy for him that's brought up a lord to believe he's just ane wi' the lave." Donal went for a stroll through the town, and met the minister, but he took no notice of him. He was greatly annoyed at the march which he said the fellow had stolen upon him, and regarded him as one who had taken an unfair advantage of him. But he had little influence at the castle. The earl never by any chance went to church. His niece, lady Arctura, did, however, and held the minister for an authority at things spiritual, one of whom living water was to be had without money and without price. But what she counted spiritual things were very common earthly stuff, and for the water, it was but stagnant water from the ditches of a sham theology. Only what was a poor girl to do who did not know how to feed herself, but apply to one who pretended to be able to feed others? How was she to know that he could not even feed himself? Out of many a difficulty she thought he helped her, only the difficulty would presently clasp her again, and she must deal with it as she best could, until a new one made her forget it, and go to the minister, or rather to his daughter, again. She was one of those who feel the need of some help to live, some upholding that is not of themselves, but who, through the stupidity of teachers unconsciously false, men so unfit that they do not know they are unfit, direct their efforts first towards having correct notions, then to work up the feelings that belong to those notions. She was an honest girl so far as she had been taught, perhaps not so far as she might have been without having been taught. How was she to think aright with scarce a glimmer of God's truth? How was she to please God, as she called it, who thought of him in a way repulsive to every loving soul? How was she to be accepted of God, who did not accept her own neighbour, but looked down, without knowing it, upon so many of her fellow creatures? How should such a one either enjoy or recommend her religion? It would have been the worse for her if she had enjoyed it, the worse for others if she had recommended it. Religion is simply the way home to the Father. There was little of the path in her religion except the difficulty of it. The true way is difficult enough because of our unchildlikeness, uphill, steep, and difficult, but there is fresh life on every surmounted height, a purer air gained, ever more life for more climbing. But the path that is not the true one is not therefore easy. Uphill is hard walking, but through a bog is worse. Those who seek God with their faces not even turned towards him, who, instead of beholding the Father in the Son, take the stupidest opinions concerning him and his ways from other men, what should they do but go wandering on dark mountains, spending their strength in avoiding precipices and getting out of bogs, mourning and sighing over their sins, instead of leaving them behind and fleeing to the Father, whom to know is eternal life? Did they but set themselves to find out what Christ knew and meant and commanded, and then to do it, they would soon forget their false teachers. But alas, they go on bowing before long-faced, big-worded authority, the more fatally when it is embodied in a good man who, himself a victim to faith in men, sees the Son of God only through the theories of others, and not with the sight of his own spiritual eyes. Donal had not yet seen the lady. He neither ate, sat, nor held intercourse with the family. Away from Davy, he spent his time in his tower chamber, or out of doors. All the grounds were open to him, except a walled garden on the southeastern slope, looking towards the sea, which the earl kept for himself, though he rarely walked in it. On the side of the hill away from the town was a large park reaching down to the river, and stretching a long way up its bank, with fine trees and glorious outlooks to the sea in one direction, and to the mountains in the other. Here Donal would often wander, now with a book, now with Davy. The boy's presence was rarely an interruption to his thoughts when he wanted to think. Sometimes he would throw himself on the grass and read aloud. Then Davy would throw himself beside him, and let the words he could not understand flow over him in a spiritual cataract. On the river was a boat, and though at first he was awkward enough in the use of the oars, he was soon able to enjoy thoroughly a row up or down the stream, especially in the twilight. He was alone with his book under a beech tree on a steep slope to the river, the day after his affair with Lord Forgue. Reading aloud, he did not hear the approach of his lordship. "Mr. Grant," he said, "if you will say you are sorry you threw me from my horse, I will say I am sorry I struck you." "I am very sorry," said Donal, rising, "that it was necessary to throw you from your horse, and perhaps your lordship may remember that you struck me before I did so." "That has nothing to do with it. I propose an accommodation, or compromise, or what you choose to call it. If you will do the one, I will do the other. What I think I ought to do, my lord, I do without bargaining. I am not sorry I threw you from your horse, and to say so would be to lie." "Of course everybody thinks himself in the right," said his lordship with a small sneer. "It does not follow that no one is ever in the right," returned Donal. "Does your lordship think you were in the right, either towards me or the poor animal who could not obey you because he was in torture?" "I don't say I do." "Then everybody does not think himself in the right." "I take your lordship's admission as an apology." "By no means. When I make an apology I will do it. I will not sneak out of it." He was evidently at strife with himself. He knew he was wrong, but could not yet bring himself to say so. It is one of the poorest of human weaknesses that a man should be ashamed of saying he has done wrong, instead of so ashamed of having done wrong that he cannot rest till he has said so, for the shame cleaves fast until the confession removes it. Forgue walked away a step or two, and stood with his back to Donal, poking the point of his stick into the grass. All at once he turned and said, "I will apologize if you will tell me one thing." "I will tell you whether you apologize or not," said Donal. "I have never asked you to apologize." "Tell me then why you did not return either of my blows yesterday." "I should like to know why you ask. But I will answer you. Simply because to do so would have been to disobey my master." "That's a sort of thing I don't understand. But I only wanted to know it was not cowardice. I could not make an apology to a coward." "If I were a coward, you would owe me an apology all the same, and he is a poor creature who will not pay his debts. But I hope it is not necessary I should either thrash or insult your lordship to convince you I fear you no more than that blackbird there." Forgue gave a little laugh. A moment's pause followed. Then he held out his hand, but in a half hesitating, almost sheepish way. "Well, well, shake hands," he said. "No, my lord," returned Donal. "I bear your lordship not the slightest ill will, but I will shake hands with no one in a half-hearted way, and no other way is possible while you are uncertain whether I am a coward or not."
So saying, he threw himself again upon the grass, and Lord Forgue walked away, offended afresh. The next morning he came into the schoolroom where Donal sat at lessons with Davy. He had a book in his hand. "Mr. Grant," he said, "will you help me with this passage in Xenophon?" "With all my heart," answered Donal, and in a few moments had him out of his difficulty. But instead of going, his lordship sat down a little way off, and went on with his reading; sat until master and pupil went out, and left him sitting there. The next morning he came with a fresh request, and Donal found occasion to approve warmly of a translation he proposed. From that time he came almost every morning. He was no great scholar, but with the prospect of an English university before him, thought it better to read a little. The housekeeper at the castle was a good woman, and very kind to Donal, feeling perhaps that he fell to her care the more that he was by birth of her own class, for it was said in the castle, "The tutor makes no pretence to being a gentleman." Whether he was the more or the less of one on that account, I leave my reader to judge according to his capability. Sometimes when his dinner was served, Mistress Brookes would herself appear, to ensure proper attention to him, and would sit down and talk to him while he ate, ready to rise and serve him if necessary. Their early days had had something in common, though she came from the southern highlands of green hills and more sheep. She gave him some rather needful information about the family, and he soon perceived that there would have been less peace in the house but for her good temper and good sense. Lady Arctura was the daughter of the last Lord Morven, and left sole heir to the property. Forgue and his brother Davy were the sons of the present earl. The present lord was the brother of the last, and had lived with him for some years before he succeeded. He was a man of peculiar and studious habits. Nobody ever seemed to take to him, and since his wife's death his health had been precarious. Though a strange man, he was a just if not generous master. His brother had left him guardian to Lady Arctura, and he had lived in the castle as before. His wife was a very lovely but delicate woman, and latterly all but confined to her room. Since her death a great change had passed upon her husband. Certainly his behaviour was sometimes hard to understand. "He never gangs to the kirk, not once in a 12-month," said Mrs. Brookes. "Folks would be dacent, and who ever heard o' dacent folk 'at didna gang to the kirk once in the Sabbath? I dinna haud with going twice mysel'. Ye hae no time to read your own chapters gien ye do that. But the man's a weel behaved man, so far as ye see, neither sayin' nor doin' the thing he shouldna. What he may think, wha's to say? The mair tender conscience coonts itsel' the waur sinner, an' I'm no gaein' to think what I canna ken. There's some 'at says he led a gey lowse kind of a life afore he came to bide wi' the auld yerl. He was wi' the army of foreign parts, they say, but aboot that I ken naething. The auld yerl was something o' a saint himsel', rest the bones of him. We're not the judges o' the living any more nor o' the dead. But I'm on a way to look efter things. A minute's an hour lost wi' the fool lasses. Ye're a freen' o' An'rew Comin's, they tell me, sir. I dinna ken what to do wi' his lass, she's that upsettin'. You would think she was one o' the family whiles, an' other whiles she's that silly." "I'm sorry to hear it," said Donal. "Her grandfather and grandmother are the best of good people." "I daursay, but there's just what I hae seen. Them 'at's brought up their own weel enough, their sons bear an' they'll just let gang. Either they're tired o' the thing, or they think they're safe. They hae lippit till yoong Eppy a heap ower muckle. But I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, as the minister said last Sunday, an' said weel, honest man, for it's the plain truth. He's not one o' the major nor yet the minor ones. But haud him oot o' the pulpit, an' he does no that ill. His daughter's not an ill lass either, an' a great freen' o' my lady's. But I'm clean ashamed o' mysel' to gang on this gait. Hae ye done wi' your dinner, Mr. Grant? Weel, I'll just send it clear away, and lat ye till your lessons." Chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Donal Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devora Allen. Donal Grant by George MacDonald. Chapter 17. Lady Arctura. It was now almost 3 weeks since Donal had become an inmate of the castle, and he had scarcely set his eyes on the lady of the house. Once he had seen her back, and more than once had caught a glimpse of her profile, but he had never really seen her face, and they had never spoken to each other. One afternoon he was sauntering along under the overhanging boughs of an avenue of beeches, formerly the approach to a house in which the family had once lived, but which had now another entrance. He had in his hand a copy of the Apocrypha, which he had never seen till he found this in the library. In his usual fashion he had begun to read it through, and was now in the book called the Wisdom of Solomon, at the 17th chapter, narrating the discomfiture of certain magicians. Taken with the beauty of the passage, he sat down on an old stone roller, and read aloud. Parts of the passage were these. They will enrich my page. For they that promised to drive away terrors and troubles from a sick soul, were sick themselves of fear, worthy to be laughed at. For wickedness, condemned by her own witness, is very timorous, and being pressed with conscience, always forecasteth grievous things. But they sleeping the same sleep that night, which was indeed intolerable, and which came upon them out of the bottoms of inevitable hell, were partly vexed with monstrous apparitions, and partly fainted, their heart failing them, for a sudden fear, and not looked for, came upon them. So then whosoever there fell down was straitly kept, shut up in a prison without iron bars. For whether he were husbandman, or shepherd, or a labourer in the field, he was overtaken, and endured that necessity which could not be avoided, for they were all bound with one chain of darkness. Whether it were a whistling wind, or a melodious noise of birds among the spreading branches, or a pleasing fall of water running violently, or a terrible sound of stones cast down, or a running that could not be seen of skipping beasts, or a roaring voice of most savage wild beasts, or a rebounding echo from the hollow mountains, these things made them to swoon for fear. For the whole world shined with clear light, and none were hindered in their labour. Over them only was spread a heavy night, an image of that darkness which should afterward receive them, but yet were they unto themselves more grievous than the darkness. He had read so much and stopped to think a little, for through the incongruity of it, which he did not doubt arose from poverty of imagination in the translator, rendering him unable to see what the poet meant, ran yet an indubitable vein of awful truth. Whether fully intended by the writer or not mattered little to such a reader as Donal. When, lifting his eyes, he saw Lady Arctura standing before him with a strange listening look. A spell seemed upon her. Her face was white, her lips white and a little parted. Attracted, as she was about to pass him, by the sound of what was none the less like the Bible from the solemn crooning way in which Donal read it to the congregation of his listening thoughts, yet was certainly not the Bible, she was presently fascinated by the vague terror of what she heard, and stood absorbed. Without much originative power, she had an imagination prompt and delicate and strong in response. Donal had but a glance of her. His eyes returned again at once to his book, and he sat silent and motionless, though not seeing a word. For one instant she stood still, then he heard the soft sound of her dress as, with noiseless foot, she stole back and took another way. I must give my reader a shadow of her. She was rather tall, slender, and fair, but her hair was dark, and so crinkly that, when merely parted, it did all the rest itself. Her forehead was rather low, her eyes were softly dark, and her features very regular, her nose perhaps hardly large enough, or her chin. Her mouth was rather thin-lipped, but would have been sweet except for a seemingly habitual expression of pain. A pair of dark brows overhung her sweet eyes, and gave a look of doubtful temper, yet restored something of the strength lacking a little in nose and chin. It was an interesting, not a quite harmonious face, and in happiness might, Donal thought, be beautiful even. Her figure was eminently graceful, as Donal saw when he raised his eyes at the sound of her retreat. He thought she needed not have run away as from something dangerous. Why did she not pass him like any other servant of the house? But what seemed to him like contempt did not hurt him. He was too full of realities to be much affected by opinion however shown. Besides, he had had his sorrow and had learned his lesson. He was a poet, but one of the few without any weak longing after listening ears. The poet whose poetry needs an audience can be but little of a poet. Neither can the poetry that is of no good to the man himself be of much good to anybody else. There are the song poets and the life poets, or rather the God poems. Sympathy is lovely and dear, chiefly when it comes unsought, but the fame after which so many would-be, yea, so many real poets sigh, is poorest froth. Donal could sing his songs like the birds, content with the blue heaven or the sheep for an audience, or any passing angel that cared to listen. On the hillsides he would sing them aloud, but it was of the merest natural necessity. A look of estrangement on the face of a friend, a look of suffering on that of any animal, would at once and sorely affect him, but not a disparaging expression on the face of a comparative stranger, were she the loveliest woman he had ever seen. He was little troubled about the world, because little troubled about himself. Lady Arctura and Lord Forgue lived together like brother and sister, apparently without much in common, and still less of misunderstanding. There would have been more chance of their taking a fancy to each other if they had not been brought up together. They were now little together, and never alone together. Very few visitors came to the castle, and then only to call. Lord Morven seldom saw anyone, his excuse being his health. But Lady Arctura was on terms of intimacy with Sophia Carmichael, the minister's daughter, to whom her father had communicated his dissatisfaction with the character of Donal, and poured out his indignation at his conduct. He ought to have left the parish at once, whereas he had instead secured for himself the best, the only situation in it, without giving him a chance of warning his lordship. The more injustice her father spoke against him, the more Miss Carmichael condemned him, for she was a good daughter, and looked up to her father as the wisest and best man in the parish. Very naturally, therefore, she repeated his words to Lady Arctura. She in her turn conveyed them to her uncle. He would not, however, pay much attention to them. The thing was done, he said. He had himself seen and talked with Donal, and liked him. The young man had himself told him of the clergyman's disapprobation. He would request him to avoid all reference to religious subjects. Therewith he dismissed the matter, and forgot all about it. Anything requiring an effort of the will, an arrangement of ideas, or thought as to mode, his lordship would not encounter. Nor was anything to him of such moment that he must do it at once. Lady Arctura did not again refer to the matter. Her uncle was not one to take liberties with, least of all to press to action. But she continued painfully doubtful whether she was not neglecting her duty, trying to persuade herself that she was waiting only till she should have something definite to say of her own knowledge against him. And now what was she to conclude from his reading the Apocrypha? The fact was not to be interpreted to his advantage. Was he not reading what was not the Bible, as if it were the Bible, and when he might have been reading the Bible itself? Besides, the Apocrypha came so near the Bible when it was not the Bible, it must be at least rather wicked. At the same time, she could not drive from her mind the impressiveness both of the matter she had heard, and his manner of reading it. The strong sound of judgment and condemnation in it came home to her. She could not have told how or why, except generally because of her sins. She was one of those, not very few, I think, who from conjunction of a lovely conscience with an ill-instructed mind, are doomed for a season to much suffering. She was largely different from her friend. The religious opinions of the latter, they were in reality rather metaphysical than religious, and bad either way, though she clung to them with all the tenacity of a creature with claws, occasioned her not an atom of mental discomposure. Perhaps that was in part why she clung to them. They were as she would have them. She did not trouble herself about what God required of her, beyond holding the doctrine the holding of which guaranteed, as she thought, her future welfare. Conscience toward God had very little to do with her opinions, and her heart still less. Her head, on the contrary, perhaps rather her memory, was considerably occupied with the matter. Nothing she held had ever been by her regarded on its own merits, that is, on its individual claim to truth. If it had been handed down by her church, that was enough. To support it she would search out text after text, and press it into the service. Any meaning but that which the church of her fathers gave to a passage must be of the devil, and every man opposed to the truth who saw in that meaning anything but truth. It was indeed impossible Miss Carmichael should see any meaning but that, even if she had looked for it. She was nowise qualified for discovering truth, not being herself true. What she saw and loved in the doctrines of her church was not the truth, but the assertion. and whoever questioned, not to say the doctrine, but even the proving of it by any particular passage, was a dangerous person, and unsound. All the time her acceptance and defence of any doctrine made not the slightest difference to her life, as indeed how should it? Such was the only friend lady Arctura had. But the conscience and heart of the younger woman were alive to a degree that boded ill either for the doctrine that stinted their growth, or the nature unable to cast it off. Miss Carmichael was a woman about 26, and had been a woman, like too many Scotch girls, long before she was out of her teens, a human flower cut and dried, an unpleasant specimen, and by no means valuable from its scarcity. Self-sufficient, assured, with scarce shyness enough for modesty, handsome and hard, she was essentially a self-glorious Philistine, nor would she be anything better till something was sent to humble her, though what spiritual engine might be equal to the task was not for man to imagine. She was clever, but her cleverness made nobody happier. She had great confidence, but her confidence gave courage to no one, and took it from many. She had little fancy, and less imagination than any other I ever knew. The divine wonder was, that she had not yet driven the delicate, truth-loving Arctura mad. From her childhood she had had the ordering of all her opinions. Whatever Sophie Carmichael said, lady Arctura never thought of questioning. A lie is indeed a thing in its nature unbelievable, but there is a false belief always ready to receive the false truth, and there is no end to the mischief the two can work. The awful punishment of untruth in the inward parts is that the man is given over to believe a lie. Lady Arctura was in herself a gentle creature, who shrank from either giving or receiving a rough touch, but she had an inherited pride, by herself unrecognized as such, which made her capable of hurting as well as being hurt. Next to the doctrines of the Scottish Church, she respected her own family. It had in truth no other claim to respect than that its little good and much evil had been done before the eyes of a large part of many generations, whence she was born to think herself distinguished, and to imagine a claim for the acknowledgment of distinction upon all except those of greatly higher rank than her own. This inborn arrogance was in some degree modified by respect for the writers of certain books, not one of whom was of any regard in the eyes of the thinkers of the age. Of any writers of power, beyond those of the Bible, either in this country or another, she knew nothing. Yet she had a real instinct for what was good in literature, and of the writers to whom I have referred, she not only liked the worthiest best, but liked best their best things. I need hardly say they were all religious writers, for the keen conscience and obedient heart of the girl had made her very early turn herself towards the quarter where the sun ought to rise, the quarter where all night long gleams the auroral hope. But unhappily she had not gone direct to the heavenly well in earthly ground, the words of the Master himself. How could she? From very childhood her mind had been filled with traditionary utterances concerning the divine character and the divine plans, the merest inventions of men far more desirous of understanding what they were not required to understand than of doing what they were required to do, whence their crude and false utterances concerning a God of their own fancy, in whom it was a good man's duty, in the name of any possible God, to disbelieve, and just because she was true, authority had immense power over her. The very sweetness of their nature forbids such to doubt the fitness of others. She had besides had a governess of the orthodox type, a large proportion of whose teaching was of the worst heresy, for it was lies against him who is light, and in whom is no darkness at all. Her doctrines were so many smoked glasses held up between the mind of her pupil and the glory of the living God, nor had she once directed her gaze to the very likeness of God, the face of Jesus Christ. Had Arctura set herself to understand him the knowledge of whom is eternal life, she would have believed none of these false reports of him, but she had not yet met with any one to help her to cast aside the doctrines of men, and go face to face with the Son of Man, the visible God. First lie of all, she had been taught that she must believe so and so before God would let her come near him or listen to her. The old cobbler could have taught her differently, but she would have thought it improper to hold conversation with such a man, even if she had known him for the best man in Auchars. She was in sore and sad earnest to believe as she was told she must believe. Therefore, instead of beginning to do what Jesus Christ said, she tried hard to imagine herself one of the chosen, tried hard to believe herself the chief of sinners. There was no one to tell her that it is only the man who sees something of the glory of God, the height and depth and breadth and length of his love and unselfishness, not a child dabbling in stupid doctrines, that can feel like St. Paul. She tried to feel that she deserved to be burned in hell for ever and ever, and that it was boundlessly good of God, who made her so that she could not help being a sinner, to give her the least chance of escaping it. She tried to feel that, though she could not be saved without something which the God of perfect love could give her if he pleased, but might not please to give her, yet if she was not saved it would be all her own fault, and so ever the round of a great miserable treadmill of contradictions. For a moment she would be able to say this or that she thought she ought to say. The next the feeling would be gone, and she as miserable as before. Her friend made no attempt to imbue her with her own calm indifference, nor could she have succeeded had she attempted it. But though she had never been troubled herself, and that because she had never been in earnest, she did not find it the less easy to take upon her the role of a spiritual adviser, and gave no end of counsel for the attainment of assurance. She told her truly enough that all her trouble came of want of faith, but she showed her no one fit to believe in. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Donal Grant. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devorah Allen. Donal Grant, by George MacDonald. Chapter 18. A Clash. All this time, Donal had never again seen the Earl, neither had the latter shown any interest in Davy's progress. But Lady Arctura was full of serious anxiety concerning him. Heavily prejudiced against the tutor, she dreaded his influence on the mind of her little cousin. There was a small recess in the schoolroom. It had been a bay window, but from an architectural necessity arising from decay, it had, all except a narrow eastern light, been built up, and in this recess Donal was one day sitting with a book, while Davy was busy writing at the table in the middle of the room. It was past school hours, but the weather did not invite them out of doors, and Donal had given Davy a poem to copy. Lady Arctura came into the room. She had never entered it before since Donal came, and thinking he was alone, began to talk to the boy. She spoke in so gentle a tone that Donal, busy with his book, did not for some time distinguish a word she said. He never suspected she was unaware of his presence. By degrees her voice grew a little louder, and by these words reached him. "You know, Davy dear, every sin, whatever it is, deserves God's wrath and curse, both in this life and that which is to come. And if it had not been that Jesus Christ gave himself to turn away his anger and satisfy his justice by bearing the punishment for us, God would send us all to the place of misery for ever and ever. It is for his sake, not for ours, that he pardons us." She had not yet ceased when Donal rose in the wrath of love, and came out into the room. "Lady Arctura," he said, "I dare not sit still and hear such false things uttered against the blessed God." Lady Arctura started in dire dismay, but in virtue of her breed and her pride recovered herself immediately, drew herself up, and said, "Mr. Grant, you forget yourself." "I'm very willing to do that, my lady," answered Donal, "but I must not forget the honour of my God. If you were a heathen woman, I might think whether the hour was come for enlightening you further, but to hear one who has had the Bible in her hands from her childhood say such things about the God who made her and sent his Son to save her, without answering a word for him, would be cowardly." "What do you know about such things? What gives you a right to speak?" said Lady Arctura. Her pride strength was already beginning to desert her. "I had a Christian mother," answered Donal, "have her yet, thank God, who taught me to love nothing but the truth. I have studied the Bible from my childhood, often whole days together when I was out with the cattle or the sheep, and I have tried to do what the Lord tells me, from nearly the earliest time I can remember. Therefore I am able to set to my seal that God is true, that he is light, and there is no darkness of unfairness or selfishness in him. I love God with my whole heart and soul, my lady." Arctura tried to say she too loved him so, but her conscience interfered, and she could not.
I don't say you don't love him," Donal went on, "but how you can love him and believe such things of him, I don't understand. Whoever taught them first was a terrible liar against God, who is lovelier than all the imaginations of all his creatures can think." Lady Arctura swept from the room, though she was trembling from head to foot. At the door she turned and called Davy. The boy looked up in his tutor's face, mutely asking if he should obey her. "Go," said Donal. In less than a minute he came back, his eyes full of tears. "Arkie says she is going to tell papa. Is it true, Mr. Grant, that you are a dangerous man? I do not believe it, though you do carry such a big knife." Donal laughed. "It is my grandfather's skein dhu," he said. "I mend my pens with it, you know. But it is strange, Davy, that when a body knows something other people don't, they should be angry with him. They will even think he wants to make them bad, when he wants to help them to be good." "But Arkie is good, Mr. Grant." "I am sure she is. But she does not know so much about God as I do, or she would never say such things of him. We must talk about him more after this." "No, no, please, Mr. Grant, we won't say a word about him, for Arkie says except you promise never to speak of God, she will tell papa, and he will send you away." "Davy," said Donal with solemnity, "I would not give such a promise for the castle and all it contains. No, not to save your life and the life of everybody in it. For Jesus says, 'Whosoever denieth me before men, him will I deny before my Father in heaven.' And rather than that I would jump from the top of the castle. Why, Davy, would a man deny his own father or mother?" "I don't know," answered Davy. "I don't remember my mother." "I'll tell you what," said Donal with sudden inspiration. "I will promise not to speak about God at any other time, if she will promise to sit by when I do speak of him. Say once a week. Perhaps we shall do what he tells us all the better that we don't talk so much about him." "Oh, thank you, Mr. Grant! I will tell her," cried Davy, jumping up relieved. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Grant!" he repeated. "I could not bear you to go away. I should never stop crying if you did. And you won't say any wicked things, will you? For Arkie reads her Bible every day." "So do I, Davy." "Do you?" returned Davy. "I'll tell her that too, and then she will see she must have been mistaken." He hurried to his cousin with Donal's suggestion. It threw her into no small perplexity, first from doubt as to the propriety of the thing proposed, next because of the awkwardness of it, then from a sudden fear lest his specious tongue should lead herself into the by-paths of doubt, and to the castle of giant despair, at which indeed it was a gracious wonder she had not arrived ere now. What if she should be persuaded of things which it was impossible to believe, and be saved? She did not see that such belief as she desired to have was in itself essential damnation. For what can there be in heaven or earth for a soul that believes in an unjust God? To rejoice in such a belief would be to be a devil, and to believe what cannot be rejoiced in is misery. No doubt a man may not see the true nature of the things he thinks he believes, but that cannot save him from the loss of not knowing God, whom to know is alone eternal life. For who can know him that believes evil things of him? That many a good man does believe such things only argues his heart not yet won towards him. To make his belief possible he must dwell on the good things he has learned about God, and not think about the bad things. And what would Sophia say? Lady Arctura would have sped to her friend for counsel before giving any answer to the audacious proposal, but she was just then from home for a fortnight, and she must resolve without her. She reflected also that she had not yet anything sufficiently definite to say to her uncle about the young man's false doctrine, and for herself concluded that, as she was well grounded for argument, knowing thoroughly the shorter catechism with the proofs from scripture of every doctrine it contained, it was foolish to fear anything from one who went in the strength of his own ignorant and presumptuous will, regardless of the opinions of the fathers of the church, and accepting only such things as were pleasing to his unregenerate nature. But she hesitated, and after waiting for a week without receiving any answer to his proposal, Donal said to Davy, "We shall have a lesson in the New Testament to morrow. You had better mention it to your cousin." The next morning he asked him if he had mentioned it. The boy said he had. "What did she say, Davy?" "Nothing, only looked strange," answered Davy. When the hour of noon was past, and Lady Arctura did not appear, Donal said, "Davy, we'll have our New Testament lesson out of doors. That is the best place for it." "It is the best place," responded Davy, jumping up.
"But you're not taking your book, Mr. Grant." "Never mind. I will give you a lesson or two without book first." Just as they were leaving the room, appeared Lady Arctura with Miss Carmichael. "I understood," said the former, with not a little haughtiness, "that you—" She hesitated, and Miss Carmichael took up the word. "We wish to form our own judgment," she said, "on the nature of the religious instruction you give your pupil." "I invited Lady Arctura to be present when I taught him about God," said Donal. "Then are you not now going to do so?" said Arctura. "As your ladyship made no answer to my proposal, and school hours were over, I concluded you were not coming." "And you would not give the lesson without her ladyship," said Miss Carmichael. "Very right." "Excuse me," returned Donal, "we were going to have it out of doors." "But you had agreed not to give him any so called religious instruction but in the presence of Lady Arctura." "By no means. I only offered to give it in her presence if she chose. There was no question of the lessons being given." Miss Carmichael looked at Lady Arctura, as much as to say, "Is he speaking the truth?" And if she replied, it was in the same fashion. Donal looked at Miss Carmichael. He did not at all relish her interference. He had never said he would give his lesson before any who chose to be present. But he did not see how to meet the intrusion. Neither could he turn back into the schoolroom, sit down, and begin. He put his hand on Davie's shoulder, and walked slowly towards the lawn. The ladies followed in silence. He sought to forget their presence, and be conscious only of his pupils and his masters. On the lawn he stopped suddenly. "Davie," he said, "where do you fancy the first lesson in the New Testament ought to begin?" "At the beginning," replied Davie. "When a thing is perfect, Davie, it is difficult to say what is the beginning of it. Show me one of your marbles." The boy produced from his pocket a pure white one, a real marble. "That is a good one for the purpose," remarked Donal. "Very smooth and white, with just one red streak in it. Now, where is the beginning of this marble?" "Nowhere," answered Davie. "If I should say everywhere?" suggested Donal. "Ah, yes!" said the boy. "But I agree with you that it begins nowhere." "It can't do both." "Oh, yes, it can. It begins nowhere for itself, but everywhere for us. Only all its beginnings are endings, and all its endings are beginnings. Look here, suppose we begin at this red streak. It is just there we should end again. That is because it is a perfect thing. Well, there was one who said, 'I am Alpha and Omega,' the first Greek letter and the last, you know. The beginning and the end, the first and the last. All the New Testament is about him. He is perfect, and I may begin about him where I best can. Listen then, as if you had never heard anything about him before. Many years ago, about 50 or 60 grandfathers off, there appeared in the world a few men who said that a certain man had been their companion for some time and had just left them, that he was killed by cruel men and buried by his friends, but that, as he had told them he would, he lay in the grave only 3 days, and left it on the third alive and well, and that after 40 days, during which they saw him several times, he went up into the sky and disappeared. It wasn't a very likely story, was it?" "No," replied Davie. The ladies exchanged looks of horror. Neither spoke, but each leaned eagerly forward in fascinated expectation of worse to follow. "But, Davie," Donal went on, "however unlikely it must have seemed to those who heard it, I believe every word of it." A ripple of contempt passed over Miss Carmichael's face. "For," continued Donal, "the man said he was the Son of God, come down from his Father to see his brothers, his Father's children, and take home with him to his Father those who would go." "Excuse me," interrupted Miss Carmichael, with a pungent smile. "What he said was, that if any man believed in him, he should be saved." "Run along, Davie," said Donal. "I will tell you more of what he said next lesson. Don't forget what I've told you now." "No, sir," answered Davie, and ran off. Donal lifted his hat, and would have gone towards the river. But Miss Carmichael, stepping forward, said, "Mr. Grant, I cannot let you go till you answer me one question. Do you believe in the atonement?" "I do," answered Donal. "Favour me then with your views upon it," she said. "Are you troubled in your mind on the subject?" asked Donal. Not in the least, she replied, with a slight curl of her lip. Then I see no occasion for giving you my views. But I insist. Donal smiled. Of what consequence can my opinions be to you, ma'am? Why should you compel a confession of my faith? As the friend of this family, and the daughter of the clergyman of this parish, I have a right to ask what your opinions are. You have a most important charge committed to you, a child for whose soul you have to account. For that I am accountable, but pardon me, not to you. You are accountable to Lord Morven for what you teach his child. I am not. What? He will turn you away at a moment's notice if you say so to him. I should be quite ready to go. If I were accountable to him for what I taught, I should of course teach only what he pleased. But do you suppose I would take any situation on such a condition? It is nothing to me, or his lordship either, I presume, what you would or would not do. Then I see no reason why you should detain me. Lady Arctura, I did not offer to give my lesson in the presence of any other than yourself. I will not do so again. You will be welcome, for you have a right to know what I am teaching him. If you bring another, except it be my lord Morven, I will take David to my own room. With these words he left them. Lady Arctura was sorely bewildered. She could not but feel that her friend had not shown to the better advantage, and that the behaviour of Donal had been dignified. But surely he was very wrong. What he said to Davy sounded so very different from what was said at church, and by her helper, Miss Carmichael. It was a pity they had heard so little. He would have gone on, if only Sophie had had patience and held her peace. Perhaps he might have spoken better things if she had not interfered. It would hardly be fair to condemn him upon so little. He had said that he believed every word of the New Testament, or something very like it. "I have heard enough," said Miss Carmichael. "I will speak to my father at once." The next day Donal received a note to the following effect: "Sir, in consequence of what I felt bound to report to my father of the conversation we had yesterday, he desires that you will call upon him at your earliest convenience. He is generally at home from 3 to 5. Yours truly, Sophia Agnes Carmichael." To this Donal immediately replied: "Madam, notwithstanding the introduction I brought him from another clergyman, your father declined my acquaintance, passing me afterwards as one unknown to him. From this fact, and from the nature of the report which your behaviour to me yesterday justifies me in supposing you must have carried to him, I can hardly mistake his object in wishing to see me. I will attend the call of no man to defend my opinions. Your father's I have heard almost every Sunday since I came to the castle, and have been from childhood familiar with them. Yours truly, Donal Grant." Not a word more came to him from either of them. When they happened to meet, Miss Carmichael took no more notice of him than her father. But she impressed it upon the mind of her friend that, if unable to procure his dismission, she ought at least to do what she could to protect her cousin from the awful consequences of such false teaching. If she was present, he would not say such things as he would in her absence, for it was plain he was under restraint with her. She might even have some influence with him if she would but take courage to show him where he was wrong. Or she might find things such that her uncle must see the necessity of turning him away. As the place belonged to her, he would never go dead against her. She did not see that that was just the thing to fetter the actions of a delicate-minded girl. Continually haunted, however, with the feeling that she ought to do something, Lady Arctura felt as if she dared not absent herself from the lesson, however disagreeable it might prove. That much she could do. Upon the next occasion, therefore, she appeared in the schoolroom at the hour appointed, and with a cold bow took the chair Donal placed for her. "Now, Davy," said Donal, "what have you done since our last lesson?" Davy stared. "You didn't tell me to do anything, Mr. Grant." "No. But what then did I give you the lesson for? Where is the good of such a lesson if it makes no difference to you? What was it I told you?" Davy, who had never thought about it since, the lesson having been broken off before Donal could bring it to its natural fruit, considered, and said, "That Jesus Christ rose from the dead." "Well, where is the good of knowing that?" Davy was silent. He knew no good of knowing it, neither could imagine any. The catechism, of which he had learned about half, suggested nothing. "Come, Davy, I will help you. Is Jesus dead, or is he alive?" Davy considered. "Alive," he answered. "What does he do?" Davy did not know. "What did he die for?" Here Davy had an answer. a cut and dried one. To take away our sins, he said. Then what does he live for? Davy was once more silent. Do you think that if a man died for a thing, he would be likely to forget it the minute he rose again? No, sir. Do you not think he would just go on doing the same thing as before? I do, sir. Then, as he died to take away our sins, he lives to take them away. Yes, sir. What are sins, Davy? Bad things, sir. Yes, the bad things we think, and the bad things we feel, and the bad things we do. Have you any sins, Davy? Yes, I am very wicked. Oh, are you? How do you know it? Archie told me. What is being wicked? Doing bad things. What bad things do you do? I don't know, sir. Then you don't know that you are wicked. You only know that Archie told you so. Lady Arctura drew herself up, but Donal was too intent to perceive the offence he had given. I will tell you, Donal went on, something you did wicked today. Davy grew rosy red. When we find out one wicked thing we do, it is a beginning to finding out all the wicked things we do. Some people would rather not find them out, but have them hidden from themselves and from God too. But let us find them out, every one of them, that we may ask Jesus to take them away, and help Jesus to take them away by fighting them with all our strength. This morning you pulled the little pup's ears till he screamed. Davy hung his head. You stopped a while, and then did it again. So I knew it wasn't that you didn't know. Is that a thing Jesus would have done when he was a little boy? No, sir. Why? Because it would have been wrong. I suspect, rather, it is because he would have loved the little pup. He didn't have to think about its being wrong. He loves every kind of living thing. He wants to take away your sin because he loves you. He doesn't merely want to make you not cruel to the little pup, but to take away the wrong think that doesn't love him. He wants to make you love every living creature. Davy, Jesus came out of the grave to make us good. Tears were flowing down Davy's cheeks. The lesson's done, Davy, said Donal, and rose and went, leaving him with Lady Arctura. But ere he reached the door, he turned with sudden impulse, and said, Davy, I love Jesus Christ and his Father more than I can tell you, more than I can put in words, more than I can think. And if you love me, you will mind what Jesus tells you. What a good man you must be, Mr. Grant! Mustn't he, Archie? Sobbed Davy. Donal laughed. What, Davy? He exclaimed. You think me very good for loving the only good person in the whole world? That is very odd. Why, Davy, I should be the most contemptible creature, knowing him as I do, not to love him with all my heart. Yes, with all the big heart I shall have one day when he has done making me. Is he making you still, Mr. Grant? I thought you were grown up. Well, I don't think he will make me any taller, answered Donal, but the live part of me, the thing I love you with, the thing I think about God with, the thing I love poetry with, the thing I read the Bible with, that thing God keeps on making bigger and bigger. I do not know where it will stop. I only know where it will not stop. That thing is me, and God will keep on making it bigger to all eternity, though he has not even got it into the right shape yet. Why is he so long about it? I don't think he is long about it, but he could do it quicker if I were as good as by this time I ought to be, with the father and mother I have, and all my long hours on the hillsides with my New Testament and the sheep. I prayed to God on the hill and in the fields, and he heard me, Davy, and made me see the foolishness of many things, and the grandeur and beauty of other things. Davy, God wants to give you the whole world and everything in it. When you have begun to do the things Jesus tells you, then you will be my brother, and we shall both be his little brothers and the sons of his Father God, and so the heirs of all things. With that he turned again and went. The tears were rolling down Arctura's face without her being aware of it. He is a well-meaning man, she said to herself, but dreadfully mistaken. The Bible says believe, not do. The poor girl, though she read her Bible regularly, was so blinded by the dust and ashes of her teaching that she knew very little of what was actually in it. The most significant things slipped from her as if they were merest words without shadow of meaning or intent. They did not support the doctrines she had been taught, and therefore said nothing to her. The story of Christ and the appeals of those who had handled the word of life, had another end in view than making people understand how God arranged matters to save them. God would have us live. If we live, we cannot but know. All the knowledge in the universe could not make us live. Obedience is the road to all things, the only way in which to grow able to trust Him. Love and faith and obedience are sides of the same prism. Regularly after that, Lady Arctura came to the lesson, always intending to object as soon as it was over, but always before the end came, Donal had said something that went so to the heart of the honest girl that she could say nothing. As if she too had been a pupil, as indeed she was, far more than either knew, she would rise when Davy rose, and go away with him. But it was to go alone into the garden, or to her room, not seldom finding herself wishing things true which yet she counted terribly dangerous. Listening to them, might not she as well as Davy fail miserably of escape from the wrath to come? End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Donal Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devora Allen. Donal Grant, by George MacDonald. Chapter 19. The Factor. The old avenue of beeches, leading immediately nowhither any more, but closed at one end by a built-up gate, and at the other by a high wall, between which 2 points it stretched quite a mile, was a favourite resort of Donal's, partly for its beauty, partly for its solitude. The arms of the great trees crossing made of it a long aisle, its roof a broken vault of leaves, upheld by irregular pointed arches, which affected one's imagination like an ever-shifting dream of architectural suggestion. Having ceased to be a way, it was now all but entirely deserted, and there was eeriness in the vanishing vista that showed nothing beyond. When the wind of the twilight sighed in gusts through its mournful crowd of fluttered leaves, or when the wind of the winter was tormenting the ancient haggard boughs, and the trees looked as if they were weary of the world, and longing after the garden of God, yet more when the snow lay heavy upon their branches, sorely trying their aged strength to support its oppression, and giving the onlooker a vague sense of what the world would be if God were gone from it. Then the old avenue was a place from which one with more imagination than courage would be ready to haste away, and seek instead the abodes of men. But Donal, though he dearly loved his neighbour, and that in the fullest concrete sense, was capable of loving the loneliest spots, for in such he was never alone. It was altogether a neglected place. Long grass grew over its floor from end to end, cut now and then for hay, or to feed such animals as had grass in their stalls. Along one border, outside the trees, went a footpath, so little used that, though not quite conquered by the turf, the long grass often met over the top of it. Finding it so lonely, Donal grew more and more fond of it. It was his outdoor study, his prosuche, a little aisle of the great temple. Seldom indeed was his reading or meditation there interrupted by sight of human being. About a month after he had taken up his abode at the castle, he was lying one day in the grass with a book companion, under the shade of one of the largest of its beeches, when he felt through the ground, ere he heard through the air, the feet of an approaching horse. As they came near, he raised his head to see. His unexpected appearance startled the horse, his rider nearly lost his seat, and did lose his temper. Recovering the former, and holding the excited animal, which would have been off at full speed, he urged him towards Donal, whom he took for a tramp. He was rising, deliberately, that he might not do more mischief, and was yet hardly on his feet, when the horse, yielding to the spur, came straight at him, its rider with his whip lifted. Donal took off his bonnet, stepped a little aside, and stood. His bearing and countenance calmed the horseman's rage. There was something in them to which no gentleman could fail of response. The rider was plainly one who had more to do with affairs bucolic than with those of cities or courts, but withal a man of conscious dignity, socially afloat, and able to hold his own. "What the devil!" he cried, for nothing is so irritating to a horseman as to come near losing his seat, except perhaps to lose it altogether. An indignation against the cause of an untoward accident is generally a mortal's first consciousness thereupon. However foolishly, he feels himself injured. But there, having better taken in Donal's look, he checked himself. "I beg your pardon, sir," said Donal. "It was foolish of me to show myself so suddenly. I might have thought it would startle most horses. I was too absorbed to have my wits about me." The gentleman lifted his hat. "I beg your pardon in return," he said with a smile which cleared every cloud from his face. "I took you for someone who had no business here, but I imagine you are the tutor at the castle, with as good a right as I have myself." "You guess well, sir." "Pardon me that I forget your name." "My name is Donal Grant," returned Donal, with an accent on the my, intending a wish to know in return that of the speaker. "I am a Graeme," answered the other, "one of the clan, and factor to the earl. Come and see where I live. My sister will be glad to make your acquaintance. We lead rather a lonely life here, and don't see too many agreeable people." "You call this lonely, do you?" said Donal thoughtfully. "It is a grand place, anyhow." "You are right, as you see it now. But wait till winter, then perhaps you will change your impression a little." "Pardon me if I doubt whether you know what winter can be so well as I do. This east coast is by all accounts a bitter place, but I fancy it is only upon a great hillside you can know the heart and soul of a snow blast." "I yield that," returned Mr. Graeme. "It is bitter enough here, though, and a mercy we can keep warm indoors." "Which is often more than we shepherd folk can do," said Donal. Mr. Graeme used to say afterwards he was never so immediately taken with a man. It was one of the charms of Donal's habit of being, that he never spoke as if he belonged to any other than the class in which he had been born and brought up. This came partly of pride in his father and mother, partly of inborn dignity, and partly of religion. To him the story of our Lord was the reality it is, and he rejoiced to know himself so nearly on the same social level of birth as the master of his life and aspiration. It was Donal's one ambition, to give the high passion a low name, to be free with the freedom which was his natural inheritance, and which is to be gained only by obedience to the words of the Master. From the face of this aspiration fled every kind of pretence as from the light flies the darkness. Hence he was entirely and thoroughly a gentleman. What if his clothes were not even of the next to the newest cut? What if he had not been used to what is called society? He was far above such things. If he might but attain to the manners of the high countries, manners which appear because they exist, because they are all through the man, he did not think what he might seem in the eyes of men. Courteous, helpful, considerate, always seeking first how far he could honestly agree with any speaker, opposing never save sweetly and apologetically, except indeed some utterance flagrantly unjust were in his ears, there was no man of true breeding, in or out of society, who would not have granted that Donal was fit company for any man or woman. Mr. Graeme's eye glanced down over the tall square-shouldered form, a little stooping from lack of drill and much meditation, but instantly straightening itself upon any inward stir, and he said to himself, "This is no common man." They were moving slowly along the avenue, Donal by the rider's near knee, talking away like men not unlikely soon to know each other better. "You don't make much use of this avenue," said Donal. "No, its use is an old story. The castle was for a time deserted, and the family, then passing through a phase of comparative poverty, lived in the house we are in now, to my mind much the more comfortable." "What a fine old place it must be, if such trees are a fit approach to it!" "They were never planted for that. They are older far. Either there was a wood here, and the rest were cut down and these left, or there was once a house much older than the present. The look of the garden, and some of the offices, favour the latter idea." "I have never seen the house," said Donal. "You have not then been much about yet?" said Mr. Graeme. "I have been so occupied with my pupil, and so delighted with all that lay immediately around me, that I have gone nowhere, except indeed to see Andrew Coman, the cobbler." "Ah, you know him! I have heard of him as a remarkable man. There was a clergyman here from Glasgow, I forget his name, so struck with him he actually seemed to take him for a prophet. He said he was a survival of the old mystics. For my part, I have no turn for extravagance." "But," said Donal, in the tone of one merely suggesting a possibility, "a thing that from the outside may seem an extravagance, may look quite different when you get inside it." "The more reason for keeping out of it. If acquaintance must make you in love with it, the more air between you and it the better." Would not such precaution as that keep you from gaining a true knowledge of many things? Nothing almost can be known from what people say. True, but there are things so plainly nonsense. Yes, but there are things that seem to be nonsense, because the man thinks he knows what they are when he does not. Who would know the shape of a chair, who took his idea of it from its shadow on the floor? What idea can a man have of religion who knows nothing of it except from what he hears at church? Mr. Graeme was not fond of going to church, yet went. He was the less displeased with the remark. But he made no reply, and the subject dropped. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Donal Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Devora Allen. Donal Grant, by George MacDonald. Chapter 20. The Old Garden. The avenue seemed to Donal about to stop dead against a high wall, but ere they quite reached the end, they turned at right angles, skirted the wall for some distance, then turned again with it. It was a somewhat dreary wall, of grey stone, with mortar as grey, not like the rich-coloured walls of old red brick one meets in England. But its roof-like coping was crowned with tufts of wall plants, and a few lichens did something to relieve the greyness. It guided them to a farmyard. Mr. Graeme left his horse at the stable, and led the way to the house. They entered it by a back door whose porch was covered with ivy, and going through several low passages, came to the other side of the house. There Mr. Graeme showed Donal into a large, low-ceilinged, old-fashioned drawing-room, smelling of ancient rose-leaves, their odour of sad hearts rather than of withered flowers, and leaving him went to find his sister. Glancing about him, Donal saw a window open to the ground, and went to it. Beyond lay a more fairy-like garden than he had ever dreamed of. But he had read of, though never looked on such, and seemed to know it from times of old. It was laid out in straight lines, with soft walks of old turf, and in it grew all kinds of straight aspiring things. Their ambition seemed to get up, not to spread abroad. He stepped out of the window, drawn as by the enchantment of one of childhood's dreams, and went wandering down a broad walk, his foot sinking deep in the velvety grass, and the loveliness of the dream did not fade. Hollyhocks, gloriously impatient, whose flowers could not wait to reach the top ere they burst into the flame of life, making splendid blots of colour all along their ascending stalks, received him like stately dames of faery, and enticed him, gently eager for more, down the long walks between rows of them, deep red and creamy white, primrose and yellow, sure they were leading him to some wonderful spot, some nest of lovely dreams and more lovely visions. The walk did lead to a bower of roses, a bed surrounded with a trellis, on which they climbed and made a huge bonfire, altar of incense rather, glowing with red and white flame. It seemed more glorious than his brain could receive. Seeing was hardly believing, but believing was more than seeing. Though nothing is too good to be true, many things are too good to be grasped. Poor misbelieving birds of God, he said to himself, we hover about a whole wood of the trees of life, venturing only here and there a peck, as if their fruit might be poison, and the design of our creation was our ruin. We shake our wise owl-feathered heads, and declare they cannot be the trees of life, that were too good to be true. 10 times more consistent are they who deny there is a God at all, than they who believe in a middling kind of God, except indeed that they place in him a fitting faith. The thoughts rose gently in his full heart, as the flowers one after the other stole in at his eyes, looking up from the dark earth like the spirits of its hidden jewels, which themselves could not reach the sun, exhaled in longing. Over grass which fondled his feet like the lap of an old nurse, he walked slowly round the bed of the roses, turning again towards the house. But there, half-way between him and it, was the lady of the garden descending to meet him, not ancient like the garden, but young like its flowers, light-footed and full of life. Prepared by her brother to be friendly, she met him with a pleasant smile, and he saw that the light which shone in her dark eyes had in it rays of laughter. She had a dark yet clear complexion, a good forehead, a nose after no recognized generation of noses, yet an attractive one, a mouth larger than to human judgment might have seemed necessary, yet a right pleasing mouth with 2 rows of lovely teeth. All this Donal saw approach without dismay. He was no more shy with women than with men, while none the less his feeling towards them partook largely of the reverence of the ideal knight errant. He would not indeed have been shy in the presence of an angel of God, for his only courage came of truth, and clothed in the dignity of his reverence, he could look in the face of the lovely without perturbation. He would not have sought to hide from him whose voice was in the garden, but would have made haste to cast himself at his feet. Bonnet in hand, he advanced to meet Kate Graeme. She held out to him a well-shaped, good-sized hand, not ignorant of work, capable indeed of milking a cow to the cow's satisfaction. Then he saw that her chin was strong, and her dark hair not too tidy; that she was rather tall, and slenderly conceived, though plumply carried out. Her light approach pleased him; he liked the way her foot pressed the grass. If Donal loved anything in the green world, it was neither roses nor hollyhocks, nor even sweet peas, but the grass that is trodden under foot, that springs in all waste places, and has so often to be glad of the dews of heaven to heal the hot cut of the scythe. He had long abjured the notion of anything in the vegetable kingdom being without some sense of life, without pleasure and pain also, in mild form and degree. End of chapter 20.